In September, Bungie made a huge announcement. After the developer spoke publicly about its desire to push back on toxic work culture, CEO Pat Parsons pulled back the curtain on a number of new initiatives in an effort to recognize our shortcomings. Bungie would hire a diversity and inclusion director, update hiring practices, improve training and tools, allow anonymous HR reporting, and end forced arbitration. The announcement was lauded across the industry, appearing to be a set of proactive, forward looking moves amid industry wide working conditions scandals. The response from the company was different. Many of its current and former employees felt that their experiences at the company, going back as 2011 and as recently as this year, dramatically clashed with Bungie's virtuous self-portrait. While some praised the news, for many others, hiring a D&I director or ending mandatory arbitration in all employee contracts was far too little, far too late. For others still, it was only one step on a long journey to a potentially better future, but with roadblocks remaining along the way. IGN has spoken to 26 current and former employees that have worked at Bungie within the last decade. Their accounts of the studio's work culture encompass a wide range of experiences. They spawn overt sexism, boys' club culture, crunch, and HR protection of abusers, as well as more complex stories of microaggressions, systematic inequalities, and difficulties in being heard. However, interviewees also include a number of more recent employees who, despite their own hurts, truly believe the studio is slowly but steadily improving, are candid about the immense challenge of trying to turn such a massive ship in a better direction, and whose accounts of change line up with statements made to IGN by Parsons in response to this piece. Every source we interviewed joined Bungie because they wanted to be a part of making video games they cared about. But all of them have been forced to grapple personally with a question. How does a massive AAA game company of 800 plus employees fully root out a toxic culture and become a truly safe, diverse, and healthy workplace to work? There is simply no better microcosm for Bungie's historic company-wide cultural troubles than its narrative team, which has experienced toxic leadership, issues with crunch, and at times unmanageable separation between ideas of old and new Bungie culture and more, all within the last 5 or 6 years. We spoke with a number of individuals who were close to or part of the narrative team and painted a picture of a severely divided group whose problems originate as far back as Destiny 1. Several sources spoke of a narrative team led from that time who appeared to suffer massive burnout during the project, creating an increasingly toxic work environment for others on the team, enough so that the team members kept a countdown of days since his last explosion on a whiteboard. Many people I spoke were familiar with the story of him throwing a chair at a window because he felt others were ruining his creative vision of the game. And yet, he stayed at the studio for several years, eventually leaving and then being invited back to do contract work on Destiny 2. Some sources who had encounters with him during this later period said that he would frequently issue narrative direction despite no longer being a senior team member, and would become angry when he felt the Destiny 2 writers were deviating from his original version for Destiny 1. One source told a story of him yelling at her over the phone so aggressively that she was brought to tears, and she subsequently refused to be on phone calls with him without a third party present. This lead was not the only narrative team member impacted by burnout on Destiny 1, and after much of that team left following its release, Bungie assembled a new team for Destiny 2 that over time became staffed by women and people of color at a ratio higher than many other teams at the largely white and male Bungie. However, it was run during this period by a series of white male leaders who, according to many of our sources, made life miserable for their writers for years. Most of those we spoke to were reluctant to have these people named in an article like this, fearing repercussions either for themselves or for others who had vocally complained about perpetrators in the past. While the majority of our sources also wish to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal or harm to their careers, one ex-Bungie employee was willing to be named, Cookie Hipponia. If I butcher that, I apologize. A woman of color whose stories of the team's turmoil were contributed by a number of others. Many of our sources saw the plight of the narrative team from the outside, but Hipona was marred directly within it. Hired initially as a contractor in 2016, she first started at Bungie as a copy editor, then later as a full-time employee on the narrative team through 2019. Hipona recalled that she first stepped in, Bungie hadn't had a lot of editing oversight on the Destiny franchise, and had not previously focused very much on its story, consistency, or continuity. That led to a leadership that appeared to operate without normal professional boundaries. As Hipponia puts it, they just had a bunch of people who wrote things and kind of had the run of the place. One leader from earlier in this period was described by one of our anonymous sources as a sexist nightmare who yelled in meetings and would throw papers across tables. Multiple people told us that he would frequently rewrite things in the last minute, often on his way to voice recording sessions. Writers wouldn't learn about changes to their work until after voice lines had already been recorded. When people objected to his demeanor, he told them they needed thicker skin and to learn how to take criticism. He called one woman on the team an unmanageable bitch. Another source said he was literally the worst person I've ever worked for. He was eventually let go, but was replaced by what our sources say were similarly antagonizing men. One lead frequently made sexist remarks, but also complained about reverse sexism, and on at least one occasion made homophobic remarks to a queer colleague. He would openly mock his team members' ideas in meetings, then play his mockery off like a joke, and would frequently take credit for work others had done. Hipponia recalled an occasion when said lead attempted to hand off her editing duties to a relatively new employee during the meeting with top Bungie leadership about the need for story continuity, asking her, "What is it you do anyway?" When Hipponia confronted him about it later and asked why her task was being given away, he told her he was just joking around. A third narrative lead was called a callous, hierarchical, authoritarian, incurious, cruel leader by one anonymous source. Hipponia said that he would frequently ask her to do secretarial and administrative tasks like taking notes at meetings or looking up information he could have looked up himself, despite her position as a writer and editor on the team. Others recall that he frequently insulted people who stood up for themselves, including publicly dressing down the narrative team after they accommodated a last-minute request and asked that such a rush not happen again on another occasion. On another occasion, he separated and cornered an employee who stood up to him to yell at him. Multiple sources say that he regularly made racist remarks, including a lunch where one source recalled him making a number of inappropriate quips about Latin American gangs. Even aside from its turbulent senior members, the narrative team was in chaos throughout the development of Destiny 2 and a number of its follow-up expansions, consistently having to ship new content. It saw high turnover and burnout as a result. Hyponia recalled an ongoing struggle to get narrative contractors hired full-time to help ease the burden on the team. Even though the department was overwhelmed, it was repeatedly denied requests to bring on new full-time team members, and contracts would often be renewed or extended in time, resulting in months-long periods where the department was left understaffed. Those close to the team describe its members working 60, 70, 80, even 100-hour weeks during some expansions, frequently with no breaks in between crunch periods. One team member crunched while so sick that they were unable to type and had to have someone else type for them while they dictated. Another source said that the team has been told not to crunch as part of a growing studio push to eliminate the practice. The idea was that the studio would simply cut features if crunch was the only way to get them done. However, many of the writers felt that they had been backed into a corner after the painful release of Destiny 2's first DLC expansion, Curse of Osiris. Curse of Osiris' story has been lambasted on Reddit, with a few female narrative team members being singled out by the community for harassment, death threats, and vitriol. Our sources say these women didn't receive support inside the studio or from the community team for what they were going through, and multiple sources were aware of one member of leadership still at the studio who emailed Reddit comments about these women to other company leaders in a seemingly bid to tear down the narrative team because players didn't like the story. The same leader is also said to have been dismissive during a meeting about the controversy, explaining that no one should be worried because they were just going back to the Destiny 1 writing team to solve everything. In fact, multiple people familiar with the writing team related stories of its members being treated poorly by other departments at the studio, being consistently derided when the game was received badly. As a result, the narrative team was afraid of what could happen if it shipped something else that appeared to the community to be incomplete or not up to standard. So they continued to crunch, some of them going as far as to hide the overtime from their leads so that they wouldn't enforce story cuts. Crunch was exacerbated by the constant need for revisions and last-minute changes, often worsened by constant conflicts over who had control of the story. Creative direction, overall, was fraught due to the pull of different groups and powers at the studio. Some of Bungie's old guard were especially precious about the vision of Destiny 1, and reluctant to change anything about the tone, characterizations, or direction of the story as the game moved into Destiny 2 and its subsequent expansions. This was especially frustrating for the team in cases where that vision had never been explicitly defined in the game or elsewhere, but only existed in ideas in the heads of people who no longer worked in narrative. Another issue was with the development of cinematics, which were considered a prestige project, largely written separately from the main writing team in a star chamber. The cinematics team frequently tried to operate independently from the main narrative team, resulting in disconnects between established lore, planned quest narratives, and major story beats. The cinematic team's decisions, Hipponia and others recalled, would override decisions made by the narrative team, forcing last minute rewrites and more crunch. The crunches of these different interests caused further troubles as underrepresented writers and allies on the team endeavored to make Destiny's story more inclusive and thoughtful in its portrayals. Those familiar with the writing team were aware of numerous scenarios where higher up male narrative team members wanted to portray women in ways that were more degrading, tone deaf, or casually sexist. The non lead writers, both women and allies, would push back fighting to tell the kinds of hopeful and empowering stories with Destiny's women that were so often told through its male characters. While they did have a number of successes on this front over the years, it was often extremely challenging and painful for those bringing those issues forwarded to the herd, sometimes requiring assistance from sympathetic individuals with clout outside the team. A number of sources told stories of male narratives leads at the studio who pushed forward storylines for characters like Erisborn, Morozov, Anna Bray, Ikora Ray, and Saraya Hawthorne, and others that leaned on harmful stereotypes of women and mental health struggles, often despite objections from women and supportive allies across the studios. I could go on for a long time about all the ways women have been made to stand by as the men of the team have written characters in baffling, unrecognizable ways, said a source familiar with the matter. Another example of time when diverse members of the writing team were not listened to in its instance of Devram K, a scout players meet in a European Deadstone location who provides missions and talks about his love of food and tea. At one point in Destiny 2's development, a member of the writing team added a tiny piece of dialogue for Devram referring to missing his partner. It was a single line among many other lines intended to be said both Devram and many other characters who would commit on similar circumstances about their relationships, thoughts, and feelings. The line passed multiple edits and checks and was put into a build of the game before someone high up at the studio noticed and demanded to be taken out, or else they couldn't ship the game in Russia or China because of the mere implications of gay romance. The issue received attention across the studio when it was sent to a QA tester to fix as a bug, causing an eternal uproar. Eventually, the line was adjusted to have Devram just talk about someone named Mark, without any reference to who it was. This made it to the final game, and Bungie ended up being lauded for including a gay character, especially as Devram's voice actor confirmed their relationship to media not long after, unaware of the stir it had caused within the studio. One source recalled being furious. Bungie's writers had tried to gently make their story more inclusive with Destiny's first canon gay relationship. Bungie leadership had tried to stop it, but then got to enjoy positive attention anyway. For all these situations, the members of the writing team who fought for change would routinely be told they were difficult to work with, not supportive enough of their leaders, and were aggressive or abrasive, and needed to be better at taking criticism. The criticisms were often used as feedback when the team pushed for promotions after each new challenging release period, with several being turned down time and again. Haponia specifically was told she couldn't get promoted because she wasn't good enough at the game, despite the fact that her core narrative responsibilities were unrelated to gameplay design. But when she asked to be given time at work to play and improve, even offering those to tie those hours into specific work tasks, her request was denied. She also said that her own stress levels skyrocketed during her time at Bungie, increasing her need for anti-anxiety medication and therapy, and ultimately resulting in stress-related uh, gastrointestinal issues that required surgery. Hipponia was not alone. Other sources close to narrative saw their colleagues grow increasingly stressed and broken down as they experienced more health issues as time went on. In 2019, the situation became untenable. The entire writing staff tried a last-ditch effort to mediate their constant conflict with their leads with HR, but were once again told they needed to try harder to work with the people who were making their lives miserable daily. Despite the team irritating, that leads did not appear to be making efforts to build these same bridges on their end. Many wrote letters to CEO Pete Parsons begging for help. They never heard back. It wasn't until multiple writers quit and threatened to quit all at once, including every woman on the narrative team, that Bungie finally dismissed the leads responsible for the chaos and began to take the team's concerns more seriously. Those connected to the narrative team today say that things have improved, with more funding and employees to share the load, and new leads specifically tasked with help the department recover. But it ultimately took a sacrifice of many people's careers and mental and emotional well-being to get it there. While it may be the best example, narrative is thus far the only department to have suffered this way. In fact, our sources pointed to issues within almost every major team at the company. Some noted the hypocrisy at work here of Bungie's 7 stated company values. First on the list is this: teams are stronger than heroes. We hold ourselves to each other at the highest standard of mutual respect, inclusivity, and support, reads the company's statement on that idea. Knowing that teams whose members speak their mind and take risks will accomplish what no individual could. Our wins are always team wins. According to those we spoke to, this translated to a bit of shorthand internally, namely that Bungie doesn't tolerate assholes. Leadership, including Parsons, in his response to this article, says Bungie doesn't put up with the kind of rockstar culture that, at other companies, was led to problematic, popular individuals taking advantage to their position to harm others, be that through harassment, toxicity, or other forms of abuse. But many of our sources say that this company line has, up until recently, simply had not been true. Almost everyone we spoke to had stories, at least one, if not multiple individuals with long histories at Bungie that seemed to be able to get away with anything, protected by either those above them in the leadership chain or long-serving HR employees. When I read Bungie's response to Activision Blizzard, I laugh. One former employee said, "This was not my experience there. They have that core value that they don't tolerate assholes, even if they're rock stars, but they totally do. All that's aspirational. Those are the values they want to get to, but they are not enforcing them." The stories of Bungie's problematic rock stars go way back to his success as the creator of Halo. Some names only came up once or twice, others we heard repeatedly. across multiple different departments and over many years of Bungie history. One top-level company leader who has been with Bungie since Halo was described by sources as an asshole. Who would consistently disparage others, was dismissive of those who brought up the company's toxic culture, didn't bother to learn anyone's name, and whose inappropriate work wardrobe at one point included a shirt that advertised free lap rides. He was also seen getting incredibly drunk at company events and would clip his toenails at the desk. Notably, this person rose to the company's topmost level before being quietly let go after years of issues. An ambiguous company email announcing his departure referenced the company's zero tolerance policy of bad actors and offered employees mental health support if needed. A different individual, who was mentioned by a number of sources, had also been at Bungie since Halo 3, eventually rising to a director level throughout the Destiny game's productions. Sources described him as excessively abusive to his team, with some noting that his team seemed to work more late nights than others. One described him as just torturing his staff, while another described multiple instances of sexist and racist remarks. Another source close to his team described numerous instances of him intimidating employees in one-on-one meetings and vigorously berating his team when work didn't meet his standards. The stories shared here are far from only examples. We heard a number of similar tales of behavior from not just Bungie leadership, but other employees across multiple departments who were often enabled by their superiors, who would ignore or dismiss bad behavior or complaints against those they favored. In the vast majority of these cases, sources felt their stories were too specific to share in this piece without personally identifying themselves and risking either retaliation at work or violating a non-disparagement agreement, which many former employees we spoke to say they felt pressure to sign upon departing the company. Their fears may not be unfounded. In almost every story we heard, sources say that numerous reports were made to HR and leadership about these individuals, but to no avail. HR's seeming unwillingness to help those who complain about toxic team leaders was a recurring theme in our interviews. Some felt the reports were ignored entirely, while others told us they've been brought into meetings to unexpectedly find the person they reported sitting in the room to discuss the issues. There was at least one long-standing Bungie employee in HR still with the company, who almost all of our sources described as actively protecting harmful individuals. Multiple people say that their job seemed to be to make it all go away whenever someone had an issue with the company. One person recalled them as incredibly insulting to various employees behind their backs and being catty toward women about how they dressed, including calling a woman a slut. The influence of this individual, coupled with numerous other negative encounters with other HR representatives over the years, resulted in a near universal mistrust of HR from almost everyone we spoke to. Many of them noted that they struggled to trust HR anywhere as a general rule. HR, they pointed out, generally exists to protect the company rather than its employees. But Bungie's HR was, for many, on a different level. It's a well-known fact, if you talk to HR, you're putting your own job on the line, said one person. HR has never been there to protect employees. They've always been there to protect the company. I watched it happen a few times at Bungie, where someone went to HR and things went completely sideways for them. Aside from obvious issues inherent to having a number of people in positions of power at Bungie who were known as toxic, sexist, or otherwise problematic, their behavior and beliefs over the years permitted the company's culture in other, less intimidating, obvious ways. For instance, in deciding what kind of people would, over time, get to wield power over creative influence at the company alongside them, and what kinds of people would not. Women especially have struggled at Bungie over the years. Multiple women I spoke with described an environment where many men cultivated a perversive atmosphere in which women were inferior. Multiple sources said women were disproportionately talked over in meetings, had their ability to do their jobs questioned, had their ideas ignored, and then used by men who later took credit for them, or simply had their questions or input dismissed. Issues that also seem to have impacted people of color at the studio of all genders, uh, though women of color were especially impacted. One woman recalled numerous meetings where she would give feedback or ask a question, and it seemed as though no one had even heard her. I was completely invisible. A lot of women were put in what I call unappealing projects that were going to end up having major crunch issues, maybe even potentially quality issues, things that were not even funded very well, said another source. Things that were not going to succeed in a way that would allow them to shine in a review period. One woman pointed to these and similar scenarios as clear examples of why Bungie had historically had so few women in leadership. Too often, she said, it boiled down to who the top level man at Bungie were friends with, and then who those people were friends with, and who was in the in group. And because it had been white men from the start, that is how it historically tended to stay. Another source recalled upper management men at Bungie having code names for the women at the studio they found attractive, which they would openly use at the studio without the women knowing. Some of these names were references to their physical form, hair color, and outright derogatory terms. One producer was frequently mentioned by sources for routinely making sexist comments and openly talking about his love life and asking his colleagues to comment on images of women he brought up on Tinder. This producer is said to have skyrocketed through the ranks at Bungie and was very charismatic and well liked by Bungie's old guard. Enough so that any reports to his managers about his behaviors seemed to fall on deaf ears. Though he was eventually fired, one former employee recalled a number of his colleagues discussing his departure shortly after as a good guy who got taken out by political correctness, suggesting the women who reported him just needed to get a sense of humor. Another male employee was observed by a number of stories repeatedly harassing his female direct reports with sexual comments and unwanted hugs, while simultaneously belittling them and shutting them down in meetings. These women eventually had to post signage at their desks reminding both him and others to stay out of their personal space. Another source recalled a story of the same manager commenting to his female direct report that the only reason she had her job was because she was a woman. This manager was eventually let go, but it took a number of years of inappropriate behavior for it to happen. Underrepresented groups had different struggles. Several recounted stories of managers and leads making racist remarks or even using slurs to refer to more diverse Destiny characters, or, in at least one instant, an individual at the studio. Several employees also witnessed discrimination against transgender individuals at the studio, including questions about which bathrooms they were using, refusal to use correct pronouns, and other inappropriate questions. From 2016 to 2018, Hipponia became part of an internal diversity committee that had been formed the year before. The committee was an official Bungie group that, because of company restrictions on allotted hours for meetings and the lack of considered support for this particular group's needs, would be successful. Met only during lunch breaks rather than working hours, about half of the original committee was made up diverse individuals from various departments who were there to push for change. But the other half was made up of company leaders, all white, who Hipponia and other sources say put roadblocks in at every turn. Pushes to add a gender neutral bathroom to the company, to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and to complete a survey that would rate Bungie on its LGBTQ plus equality and inclusion were all stymied and rejected. Hipponia and other diverse members began to quit the committee in 2018. As the committee bled members, Bungie eventually decided that it was overall ineffective and shut it down entirely. This is updated from December 10th, and that seems to be an update. Multiple anonymous sources had told IGN that the original Bungie Diversity Committee had shut down before being revived in its new construction. And while Bungie had not replied to this particular detail before publication, they have since commented with additional information to clarify that the committee was not shut down. As we understand it under this new context, it had instead struggled along for several months before being reformed to the committee as it is today. Bungie specifically passed along the following statement from Kareem Schumann, current president of the Bungie Diversity Committee. We do not want to deny or refute any statements regarding individual experiences at Bungie. However, in respect to the hard-working members of our community, we believe that it is important to recognize the fact that the BDC was never deemed overall ineffective, nor it was ever shut down entirely. Our members, currently 100% composed of individuals from underrepresented communities, deserve to be accurately remembered for their unceasing efforts despite the challenging nature of the work they had taken on. Another group that met extraordinary challenges at Bungie for those who were dealt with physical or mental health issues. While Bungie's company health benefits were lauded by many we spoke to, a number of people also mentioned struggling or knowing people who struggle with physical or mental health problems for which Bungie was not just unaccommodating, but sometimes even hostile. One individual with health issues was forced to self-medicate with leftover medication from a previous surgery because they weren't allowed to take any more time off to address or alleviate those issues during crunch. One person who was dealing with grief over a death of the family said they were penalized in a reviewing period for being abrasive or uncommunicative during that time, despite their manager knowing the context. Multiple sources knew of individuals on the autism spectrum who struggled with receiving negative feedback without concrete direction on how to improve communication. Still, two other individuals described situations where they took time off to deal with either personal or familial health issues, only to return and seemingly be penalized by being moved into a less desirable project. Numerous people we spoke to, all who were no longer with the company, described high levels of anxiety brought on by their work at Bungie, with some attributing it to crunch, which continued to occur despite studio claims on the contrary, across departments like QA, localization, audio, narrative, and others referencing a toxic work environment or abusive managers. While many said they became depressed, eventually having to increase existing therapy sessions or start therapy for the first time, some were prescribed medication, others began drinking more, several reported being suicidal. Among many of our sources was a cognizance that, in a strange way, Bungie was better than many other game studios. Few people were aware of any overt physical harassment or assault, and a few barely encountered any inappropriate behavior at all during their time at the company. But as one woman put it, it's not necessarily to have a Cosby Suite level scandal for a company's culture to be problematic. It's very easy to be like, we don't have pictures of naked women upholstering the office, therefore we're not sexist, she said. Well, you are, but it's a lot of subtle things we haven't picked up on. It's pay discrepancy. It's looking at the data and seeing how many women leave, how many minorities leave. They discount each individual story, saying they weren't happy, they weren't a culture fit. It's harder to see, harder to qualify these things. There's not a silver bullet, not a smoking gun. But when you have a look at it, all compelled together, white men at the top promoted, paid well, minorities more likely to leave, all these things that are indicators that there is a problem, not just being content that you've never heard anyone say anything racist. The stories we've shared so far represent some of the worst of Bungie's history. A work culture with deep roots that cannot simply be dug up overnight. But in response to IGN's request for comment, Bungie CEO Pete Parsons, who have been with Bungie for almost 20 years and CEO since 2016, iterated that Bungie doesn't want to try. In a lengthy reply, he opened by apologizing to anyone who had ever experienced any less in a safe, fair, and professional working environment at Bungie. I am not here to refute or to challenge the experiences being shared by people who have graced our studio with their time and talent, Parsons said. Our actions, or in some cases inactions, cause these people pain. I apologize personally and on behalf of everyone at Bungie, who I know feel a deep sense of empathy and sadness reading through these accounts. He went in on detail a number of actions the company had taken in recent years to change its culture, many of which were also mentioned to us by current and recent employees of the studio. A number of these employees told us they believe that, slow though it may be, Bungie is trying to move in the right direction, largely thanks to a growing number of diverse individuals and their allies within the studio who have been tirelessly working over the years to change its course through individual action, company groups, and growing employee pressure for a more diverse, healthy, inclusive workplace. Sources tell us a quiet but deeply significant change that began taking place in the last few years. They began to notice a number of more powerful, problematic individuals leaving the company one by one. Many left quietly and professionally, giving the appearance of a voluntary departure, and a few even left on publicly positive terms, celebrated with fond farewell letters to the entire staff or Bungie's community. Most of them still have high-ranking positions elsewhere in the games industry. While some sources claim that certain individuals among them were quietly asked to leave, the exact circumstances around this seemingly house cleaning are unclear. Parsons confirmed to IGN that departures had happened, admitting the company had not been as transparent or swift as it could have been in removing individuals, and adding that Bungie was only able to do this when brave people come forward or when bad behavior was conducted out in the open. We believe the people whose behavior warranted removal from the company have been terminated and are no longer working for Bungie. But if new information comes to light, whether through this story or by named or anonymous people coming forward, we will act on that information and investigate it with integrity, Parsons said. While this may be good news for the future of Bungie, their former victims who were aware of this exodus told they felt betrayed and left behind. Their careers, mental health, and emotional well-being were repeatedly damaged for years, they said. Meanwhile, the people who harmed them have moved to other companies and will continue to largely be celebrated by their colleagues and the gaming public. And because of their non-disparagement agreements, there's no way to safely call them out, even in an article like this. You do need some kind of justice, said one person. That's what's absent. There's no catharsis. When bad actors are thrown out, there's no awareness of who's a bad actor to avoid. Without that, I don't think it's possible to build trust at a wide scale. Broadly, company culture is always a work in progress. But Bungie has taken some specific actions in the last few years in the right direction. Several sources note that in 2018, when Bungie brought on a diversity and inclusion lead, there appeared to be a significant push by the studio to start having measurable goals for an amount of diverse individuals in leadership positions. Though some people within the studio pushed back, these goals were in place. And while there's still work to do, Bungie's previous blog post maintains that there's been progress at the topmost levels of the company. According to Parsons, women or people from unrepresentative communities encompass half of Bungie's board of directors, and 40% of Bungie's exclusive team are women or people from underrepresented communities. More recent employees we spoke to have indicated that this has more diverse shift and has been apparent not just at the company's leadership levels, but throughout most departments as well. While Bungie did not share older statistics for comparison, it did provide some recent numbers. 20.5% of Bungie employees are women, and women made up 31% of Bungie's new hires in 2021, as well as 22.5% of people at the leadership level. People who identify as members of underrepresented groups make up 18.6% of the company, 23% of the new hires in 2021, and 20% of company leaders. Though its first D&I lead departed at the end of 2020, Bungie replaced her just recently with a brand new D&I director to continue to spearhead those efforts, including ongoing work with ERGs such as Black at Bungie, Women at Bungie, Trans at Bungie, and the newly formed Accessibility at Bungie, as well as improvements to company benefits, bringing in diverse speakers, and taking on new charitable initiatives. Bungie also reformed the diversity committee Haponia and many others quit several years ago, which had been working in tandem with the ERGs to make small but meaningful adjustments to company culture. And just this year, Parsons told us it's begun conducting reviews of its hiring, compensation, and promotion activities, including hiring a third party to audit its comparison practices. Many of our sources, as well as Parsons, also confirmed that Bungie's crunch issues had actively improved over the last several years, though sources said some teams still struggle here and there. Team contribution was cited as another active department. A few years ago, there was a push studio-wide to move to Agile department, effectively a methodology where teams come to development solutions through collaboration and teamwork. Opinions on the initial move to this technique were mixed, but current employees we spoke to felt it had ultimately made a difference. When you combine Bungie's irrelevant past with a culture that's about being the best or building aspirational moonshots, I think there was a tolerance for people being mean to each other, one person said. It was like stones shaping stones and throwing them at each other. In terms of work culture, there's been a shift to being nuanced and empathetic about people's personal growth. People are trying and they see the need for many perspectives, but they don't always know how to do it. Sometimes they get in their own way. It gets better, and our responsibility is to make things better for the future. One additional vehicle One internal vehicle for this has been the company's town hall meetings, where individuals can ask questions of leadership and then effectively vote on questions others pose, with the most popular questions, in theory, getting answers. This system has been a useful venue for many to voice frustration, though to mixed success over the years. In earlier incarnations, this system didn't provide anonymity, and several sources felt that they couldn't be candid or recalled being dogpiled by their peers or even leadership if they asked a question others disliked. With the addition of anonymity, sources said, more people felt comfortable asking questions about issues of diversity, burnout, and toxic studio behavior. And while some felt it had been helpful in voicing concerns to management, others noted that leadership often gave very lukewarm responses to serious issues. Several people recalled a senior member of the company responding to a question about a toxic work environment by saying no one had ever come to him about toxicity and that the issue wasn't a serious one. Others remembered questions that appeared to be dismissive or derogatory towards Black Lives Matter and the employee resource group, Black at Bungie. With one source feeling that management didn't suit these remarks down effectively. There is a sense among our stories that Bungie is on the way towards a truly safe, inclusive workplace, but it still has a long road ahead to get there. Many employees we asked about the overall work culture problem believe that company leaders like Parsons wanted to try and make things better, but just generally didn't know how. One current Bungie employee said, "The studio is full of well-meaning people, even at a leadership level. They do care about social causes. The criticism we have at a studio level is that they don't know how to push these causes forward. They aren't sticking their feet in the ground and saying, no, we'll never try anything. It's kind of this well-meant confusion of, how can we do this?" A former employee remarked that it was all too often the job of the minorities at the studio to educate everyone else. A job that inevitably meant doing extra unpaid labor at best, and which some sources who did that work say was often dismissed or ignored. Another source put it concisely: people are willing to learn, but wouldn't it be so nice to be somewhere where everyone already knows? A few people I spoke to expressed worry that this article would scare away more diverse individuals who wanted to apply to Bungie. Further elaborating the studio's problems, though some of those who expressed this fear were the victims of incidents like the ones described above. They had a firm belief in the studio's consistent movement in the right direction. Even though it shouldn't be on their shoulders, the truth is that the closer we can be to an accurate reflection of our community, the better we'll be as a company. One said, "Our workplace could always be better. I'm glad that as a company we recognize that we're addressing it." One specific area in which many current and recent employees expressed optimism for the future was with Bungie's current incubation projects, and one in particular. Bungie doesn't keep its secrets that multiple non-Destiny games are in development, though the ones our sourced were aware of have gone through some shifts and even cancellations over recent years. One of the projects, currently greenlit, and one of the closest to release, was frustrating for some of our sources, who felt it was largely staffed through uh, nepotistic practices and only hiring veterans and good friends, reinforcing a culture that had already proved harmful on Destiny. Another project, not yet greenlit, was spoken about glowingly by those in the know. One described it as a huge divergence from what Bungie has done before. Others told me about incredibly diverse teams of developers, with a sufficient number of leadership roles held by underrepresented minorities. One person said it was the kind of team I want Bungie to have everywhere. Someone close to the project described the group as having a positive, supportive culture in which everyone was proactive about being sensitive and thoughtful about the content they made. They described it as a new culture within Bungie being intentionally as a model of what the studio wants to be. Another explicitly connected the values of the team working on it to Bungie's company values, saying that while people will likely be surprised when they see the project, they will eventually understand how it truly upholds the values the company has been trying to stand for since they were introduced in 2014. If there was to be a change, it would have to be incubation projects showing that things can be built differently, one source said. Sources told us that there were a number of other small teams within Bungie, both within incubation and outside of it, that showed similar promise, with diverse membership and multiple women in leadership roles. These teams were microcosms of the kind of culture they believed would allow Bungie to thrive both internally and publicly, as teams are comfortable, safe, respected individuals work together on bold new ideas. These, combined with the more public and widespread company-wide shifts, gave many of our sources tentative hope for change, even as they emphasized the job was far from finished. Parsons, in conclusion of his statement to IGN, seemed to agree. At our core, I believe we are made of good people who are here to drive good change in the world, he said. I'm proud of the progress we have made, but it is not enough, and it has taken too long. It also does not sweep away the bad experiences people had at our studios. As CEO, it is my job to factor both the past and the future to be accountable for all of it. Here and now, speaking with the team at Bungie, reading the stories, and seeing both known and newly serviced accounts, it is clear we still have work ahead of us. I am committed to it. We are not yet the studio we have the potential to become, but we are on our way, and we will not rest or slow these efforts because we recognize that the journey of inclusivity, diversity, and equity is in itself the destination we all strive towards. This is critical to achieving our vision and fulfilling the potential of the welcoming, equitable home of creative and technical excellence Bungie should be. Our model, boldly to the stars, has been our creative engine since the beginning. We take this same spirit of hope and improvement to the critical human work in front of us. Our current and future actions around the care of our people will define Bungie's future and is our most important purpose. We are grateful and humbled to continue this work and are energized by the journey ahead. Ultimately, every single person we spoke to had, at least at one point, loved Bungie, though most of its pay and benefits were good. They loved their teams and colleagues, and they loved Destiny and the other projects the studio was working on. Many still do, while a number of those who were deeply hurt by the studio in the past expressed cynicism in response to its recent tweets and blog posts about becoming better. Others issued a challenge to Bungie. Don't just talk and make statements about these issues. Listen to your employees that have been giving this feedback instead of just saying, please give us feedback. Summarize one more employee who had joined the company more recently. Listen and act on it and tell us what actions you took. It seems like we're talking to the void. And especially listen to people of color and women. That challenge, one pointed out, isn't just leveled at company leadership. It's directed at the entire company, top to bottom. That's the problem Bungie needs to solve. Admit their failures here and show us the roadmap for creating a work environment safe for marginalized genders. Those slow rollout, reactionary changes maintain stability of a system that keeps bullies and abusers comfortable at the expense of their victims. 2 days after the public beginning of the Activision Blizzard scandal, Bungie posted a series of tweets decrying the behavior described, but distancing itself somewhat from those same behaviors. While the internal response was mixed, knowing that Bungie's culture has echoed some similar themes, there was simultaneously a recognition that it is also some of the way towards improvement. Still, for those who had worked at Bungie, there is a clear line between saying and doing, and they want to make sure studios does the latter. The tweet was so frustrating, said one source, because positioning yourself as we were not the problem in response to systemic industrial-wide misogyny perpetrates the problem. And the passive mention of wrongdoing is disingenuous to the victims who were harmed on their watch. Stop denying the harm done by your current and ex-employees. Your own failures, stop hiding them. We know. It is known. Show us industry-defining progress in the treatment of marginalized employees who can't possibly be mistaken for virtue signaling. I want Bungie to be what it relentlessly, repeatedly required me to be. I want Bungie to be brave. Alright. We've read the entire article. So, what is my opinion with a very long, very wordy, lots of little details, and full of stories, sources, and what people said about this article? There's several things that I agree with, and there's several things that I disagree with. So what I did was, before I recorded myself reading the article, I put down a whole bunch of bullet points of what some commentation I have right here. So first of all, every time when I see an article written, and I always like to see there's two parts of a story, okay? Are you writing this because it's the right thing to do? Or are you writing this to simply benefit yourself? I personally think it's both of them at the same time. Not only where there are several sources of ex-Bungie employees wanting to make aware of what's happening in the company, and let's be honest, a whole bunch of video game companies have had similar experiences like this before. Like, we're humans. This happens all the time. At the same time, I feel that this was timed far too perfectly with this article where it's benefiting Bungie, okay? Because usually with articles like this, I feel that it should be very, very, it shouldn't really look at Bungie in a positive light, okay? Obviously, there was some stuff that gave Bungie a very, hard knack. But for some reason, when I was reading this article, I felt that the IGN writer felt a little biased towards Bungie. simply because of the timing of the article passing itself. Now, all of you who keep attention with Bungie's past understand that Bungie used to be part of Activision. They recently stopped, I would say like a year ago, or a year or two ago actually, good grief, it's been that long. They went away from Activision and became the world's largest indie game ever created. Well, it's not technically an indie game, but you get my point. But what's interesting is the time process is Bungie leaves, Activision Blizzard has one of the hugest scandals in the gaming industry's history, and then this article happens. I really felt that this article would not be here unless the Bungie Activision stuff actually was exposed in the internet. And I feel that this article isn't being written because of the problems they're having, but because they're doing it on the basis of the message, if you guys understand my drift. They say, oh, we want to be inclusive. Oh, we are allies for this, this, and this. But are you doing this to be an ally, or are you doing this just to get brownie points from society? So that's my biggest concern with this article. That's like the biggest thing that I have questioning here. Like, are they doing this because they care, or are they doing it because of recent events or covering their butts for a lot of the stuff that they've been doing? You know, that's the biggest question I have with this article. And really, there's lots of other things, like, you know, there's company culture, company hiring practices, how the Bungie company and the Destiny community like kind of intertwine with each other. They did talk about a lot with the Curse of Osiris, and honestly, that entire crunch time with Curse of Osiris, it makes total sense. You know, like it definitely, Curse of Osiris was one of the worst expansions ever, and that was probably the reason why it happened like that. Now, with the narrative team and story team, I would like to remind everyone that Bungie had issues with the story since day one. And it seems that the article was accurate when the story started making a lot more sense when it was like 2017, 2018 when Forsaken came out. And a lot of things have happened since then where we consume Bungie's lore, Bungie's story, and Bungie's, I should say Destiny's, points much more differently than we did back in Destiny 1. Like, let's be honest, Destiny 1, the reason why we played Destiny 1 was because of the gameplay, the social interaction system, and the content that was available at the time. And back then, that was the raid and the Nightfall, especially the raid. We didn't play because of the story. We played because of the gameplay, the raid, the Crucible, and the way, and really the graphics. Like, Bungie, Destiny is still beautiful to this day. We didn't play because of the story. And I have a feeling that for the longest time, the story and narrative team knew that, and they were somewhat embarrassed by that. So they felt that it sounds kind of silly, and this is just my personal opinion. They felt that they were not as useful as the other teams in Bungie, and that's why they had the entire fiasco there in the first place. It could be something different. It could. I really think it's just simply disagreements with the story and how a lot of people were fired / quit back then because of problems, and that's how we got the story like that altogether. Is a very big possibility. And let's be honest, this article just shows it's more of a possibility than ever before. I do want to the incomplete story was very obvious. We had more questions than answers with the main campaign, and with some infighting was reported as well, and I do like to mention as well, Martin O'Donnell is a good example. Like, what happened to Mario O'Donnell? He made all the music for the first Destiny, and he quit because he had lots of issues with the company. In fact, he had so much issues with the company. It basically got to the point where he felt he was backstabbed by Bungie, and I would tend to agree with him that he illegally put up the music that he worked on that belonged to Bungie on his YouTube channel so that all of us could enjoy. And he knew the consequences of that, and then he got the MCA striked for that. The work that he actually worked on at Bungie, and Bungie punished him for it. And there's this huge court case that went on for the longest of time, and yeah, that was a big deal altogether, and a lot of people who were Halo fans didn't play Destiny because of that entire fiasco. Some people I know to this day won't play Destiny because what they did to Martin O'Donnell. And looking into it, I would I would definitely feel more empathy with Martin O'Donnell. As someone who played Halo sparsely but loving the music altogether, I could definitely be alongside of him during that point. However, I will say this, apparently Martin O'Donnell was hard to work with, and some people can make the arguments it was basically inevitable at this point if he was not going to get along with Bungie, so why on earth should I care? You shouldn't care because you like Martin O'Donnell. You should care because it was the wrong thing to do to have such a big disagreement where Martin O'Donnell had to expose his own work, which belongs to Bungie. That's just my personal opinion right there, Now, I normally don't like to talk about crunch time because, how many times have we read about articles where, oh, there was crunch time, oh, we didn't like the crunch time, we had to work 80 or 100 hours a week or whatever to make sure everything gets done and all that. First of all, let me first give you my criticisms and let me tell you how you are technically correct. Okay? How many times have Jason Schreier made an article where it says, oh, the crunch time. Meanwhile, there was a report saying that all the employees who complained about crunch time got a $50,000 bonus because they made all that, they did all that time, all that money. Plus, the sales commissions actually ended up being much better because of that crunch time. They're actually able to make the game possible. I think that happened with The Witcher 3 actually, where there were reported crunch times in CD Projekt Red, and then the game was so successful they got rewarded anyway, and then some. So, sure, this happens all the time, and in fact, I would definitely agree that crunch time is a bad thing for the video game industry, simply because if you feel like you're getting rushed to complete a project, then you're prone to more mistakes. There's probably people out there who's been to college and you have a last minute assignment you need to complete, and you haven't slept in 2 days in order to complete the assignment. Well, guess what? You're not going to do as good as a job if you've done the assignment with the time, the process, and the resources you need in order to get the task done and get the best job done possible. So I absolutely agree that crunch time is an issue with the gaming industry, but at the same time, to the people who actually complain about crunch time, they're doing it incorrectly because they're saying, oh, I represent the employees who do a whole bunch of crunch times. No, you're doing this not because of them. You're doing this because of you, who are fighting the good fight, and that's what I don't like at all. Now, granted, this article, I feel that, this is a really good example of how crunch time could be a bad thing, where if you do crunch time so much that you have a freaking Curse of Osiris in your hands, and it just wasn't that popular, and that ended up having more consequence altogether, where Reddit, little tip, don't take your advice from Reddit. They suck, okay? People who write there, they just suck, okay? Not only that, but You have a freaking person who's so sick for working so much that they have to have someone else type all their stuff all together. And not only that, they're not reporting their time because they felt that they would get in trouble with like the people. I'm sorry. That's unacceptable. If you worked, report your time. I don't care if your employer like gets all mad about it, okay? That's your workers' rights, okay? Like golly, I did that recently actually, you know? I put in the time that I was working overtime. My boss was like, "Oh, you shouldn't work there." Oh, I'm sorry, like the task had to be done. He's like, "Okay, well, I'll figure it out somehow." Okay. Guess what? No problems. But instead, if you are being, and I'm just being straight up honest with you, if you're being weak and allowing your employers to take advantage of you because you're not reporting your time, then you're allowing yourself for this stuff to happen. I'm sorry for saying that. I'm sorry if I offended you, but that's simply the truth. Don't let people take advantage of you, okay? Like, seriously. Good grief. There was a video that there's another point. There was a video that talked about I think it was Mylan Games actually. I'm gonna talk about him a little bit later. Mylan Games, he actually worked with some of the lore books that was published by Bungie, and he had some similar issues talking about what was happening with publishing the books. I'm not gonna go into details entirely. I'll just leave the video in the link in the description box. But he talked about how in the article it says we are a team. There's no I in team, basically. You know, the bullcrapper says, "Oh, there's no I in team," you know? And I feel with Bungie's standards and collectivism, it could definitely be a big issue. I mean, we have seen this in the past, especially with Marty O'Donnell, especially with, like, you know, these employees that we're talking about right now. I really feel that because of these standards, it would actually cause more problems altogether in the future because of these standards. Now, I'm not saying that teamwork is bad. What I am saying that it's equally important to understand the individual aspect of a team. Star Trek Voyager talks about this all the time. I'm a nerd. I'm supposed to reference this, okay? The Borg is the most unified thing in all the Star Trek universe. Yet, how do they interact with other people? They unify so much, they need other things to unify for them. Like the Borg are absolutely evil. Yet, at the same time, in Voyager, you still had a collective like the Borg. Only, they inherit their individuality. Do I want Bungie as the Borg? No. Even though their catchphrase is "there's no I in team," I completely disagree with the collectivism standards with some companies, including Bungie, has altogether. Okay? Being straight up. Do I support individuality? Yes, absolutely. But in order to achieve individuality, what Bungie is trying to talk about, and you know, with inclusivity, diversity, what they are talking about, you need to focus on individuality. You shouldn't have a be-all end-all word where you say, "Oh, I am ABC." Okay, well, guess what? People are way more complicated than ABC. Like, let's use me for example. I am male, I am white, and I'm half Puerto Rican. Okay? I am different from a colleague of mine who's black, who's a father, and I don't know, who's into security. Okay? Some people could identify us both as men, but individually, we are both completely different. And that's how you get in trouble with just having a certain, like, you know, big glowing sign where you say, "Oh, you're a man," okay? Yes, being a man, being a woman, and even like having your sexual orientation is important to an individual, but at the same time you have to look at the person themselves. And I really think if you're just seeing someone who's gay, who's lesbian, who's transgender, and that's the only thing that you see in them, then you're transphobic. Okay? As someone who sees someone as just a gay or a transphobe, or even seeing someone who's just a white man or just a woman or just whatever, okay? Like you're a bigot. I'm just saying straight up, okay? Look at the person individually and be able to judge on their individuality. And because they're individual, they're able to go up and be part of a team in order to make things that are great. Like one of our most favorite games, the Destiny franchise. So that is something very important. Actually, speaking of this point, I want to bring up a couple of people here, okay? Now, there's lots of LGBT, Q people around, right? And actually, I am really surprised of people not knowing these people, okay? Because I see plenty of people talk about representation of the LGBTQAAIP community, but I never see them talk about these people right here. Daniel Barry, one of the most high-profile transgender women in early video game history. She is best known for creating Mule, a multiplayer game in the Atari 400, and early personal computers that fitted 4 players against one another to create the most prosperous and survivable space colony. Because of this woman, she was able to make one of the biggest gaming innovations of multiplayer and how we could have our own setup so we could go against other players. Mule was such an important innovation in the gaming industry that it affects us to this day. It affects us in Destiny, it affects us in Call of Duty, it affects us in online gaming, it affects us in multiplayer like Call of Duty Zombies. It affects us with everything. Because of her, we are able to play these games to this day. If she is that important in the gaming industry, how come I didn't learn about her because of these representation groups, but instead I had to research her myself? Like, are you really being a representative towards the trans community because of Danielle Barry? Okay, let me talk to you about another person. Let's see here. Matt Thorson. He actually was known for Towerfall. He made lots of competitive games, so lots of Street Fighter, lots of Super Smash Bros. Games. Was influential with his time. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right, and this is my favorite guy, David Geider. David Geider is absolutely amazing. Okay. I love RPGs, and how he influenced me with RPGs. He just did so much things, not only for the RPG industry, but also for me personally. This man made Baldur's Gate 2, Knights of the Old Republic, and the entire Dragon Age universe. This man helped inspire Destiny. Well, really just storytelling altogether. KOTOR is one of the greatest games of all time, not only with story interactions with characters, developments with the protagonists, and able to have such a shock that will influence the gaming industry for all of eternity. How come you didn't know that David Geider is gay? Unbelievable. I know this because I personally, and he's one of my heroes, okay? I didn't learn this from any group, from anything, but I had to research this myself. And if you're telling me that I didn't know this about a certain person, okay, then guess what? Like, you say you want to be represented, you want to be representation of the LGBT community, but you don't talk about some of the most influential gamers and developers of all time. That's just my personal opinion, and I really think that people need to be more aware of these people because of how what great things that they've done with the video game industry. My main point is they weren't great because they were transgender or because they were gay, but because of their intelligence, their storytelling, their innovation with the gaming industry. And I do want to, and what's important is Bungie has been talking about, like, being inclusional, having having representation and stuff like that, and some people can get, and some people feel like, oh, that's a good thing, but some other people feel it's uncomfortable because they feel that you should hire based on merit instead of like race, gender, whatever. Okay, here's my personal opinion. Okay, depending on what industry it is, you're gonna have different representations off of many groups. Okay, if you're into rap, there's more representation towards black people. That's just straight up honest. Okay, for the gaming industry, there's gonna be more representation than men. Okay, I'm glad that women are actually going into the gaming industry, and it seems that they're doing an excellent job for doing it and changing the past where a majority of people were men altogether, like making video games. Okay, I am glad that women are entering in there and being successful and actually making the stories that we have today. I mean, for crying out loud, well, who wrote the Uncharted series? What's her name? See, another time they failed me. A woman helped make the Uncharted series, and I forgot her name. I must be a bigot. Who wrote the Uncharted series? Amy Hennig. There you go. Amy Hennig. Excellent writer. Excellent innovator. And really important in the gaming industry. Okay? She isn't a great writer because she's a woman, but because she is an awesome writer. And it's a shame because she basically got let off for doing Last of Us. You talk about inclusivity and, representation, but you let off one of the best writers in the gaming industry just because of reasons. I don't know. Just saying. What's important is that when you're dealing with a big group of people, you always gotta be a lady or a gentleman. That should be the standards with the industry. Okay, what the definition of a lady or a gentleman, or I don't know, a gentle person would be, is to make sure that other people around you are comfortable around you, but also you care for them as well. It goes double standard. It's double whammy right there. You not only make them feel comfortable, but you also make sure that they are okay and they have what they need. You can make someone feel comfortable and not get them what you need. That's not the definition of being a gentleman or a gentle lady or a gentle person. You have to make it so that you are doing the right thing, making sure that they are taken care of, they are comfortable, and they are good to go. I do not want to talk about this, okay? But the article does talk about toxicity with the Destiny community, with Reddit, talking about the Curse of Osiris stuff, okay? I do like to make a point that, yes, I agree, Curse of Osiris sucked, okay? Bungie agrees, the Destiny community agrees, we all agree. But at the same time, obviously, we shouldn't make death threats or make someone very uncomfortable because, they did something bad, okay? They make mistakes, okay? They should have done better because we're providing them money in order to do what they would love to do best, okay? We ask for a product and they, make that product and all that stuff, okay? But again, that little spiel I have for being a gentle person, okay? Make sure you have that all together, okay? Sometimes the Destiny community could be very, very, very influential with lots of negativity sometimes. I mean, for crying out loud, recently, we talked about Mylan Games. Mylan Games was... I love the man, I love his lore, but honestly, he did something that was kind of toxic, where he shared a like 3-second clip of Clyde pushing his dog. Should he push his dog in a rough way? No, he shouldn't, okay? But there was more context and making sure that the dog was okay, and for some odd reason, Destiny Twitter wanted to cancel him because he was rough on his dog. Okay, and Mylan didn't look into it. Like, because of the recklessness of his actions, Clyde basically got more, like, clout for being canceled on Twitter, okay? If he wasn't that reckless, that wouldn't have happened. By the way, happened 9 months ago. Twitter brought it up because it's Twitter. Mylan, got sucked into it, and, there was the consequences of all that, okay? It's funny. I'm defending Mylan and I'm attacking Mylan in the same video at the same time. So yeah, do better. Be a gentle person in the Destiny community. And just remember, have your head in the right place. 2 more takes. I hate to do this, okay? Say no to rage. Oh my gosh. People are like, no, oh come on. You can't stop. You had to keep talking about him. Yes, I need to talk about him because I have the most bipolar takes on Lono. People say he's the savior of the Destiny community. People say he is the devil and should be annihilated at all costs, okay? Lono is simply a troubled individual. He's gonna hate it when I say that, and his fans gonna do too, okay? He's not perfect, he's a troubled individual, and he admits it, okay? He says that he is no longer looking at Bungie or Destiny because Bungie and Destiny does not want him. Okay, clear out, you're good to go. But it's unhealthy when he's talking about Bungie, talking about Destiny with this article. I do like to say this to you, Lono, if you're watching this. This article is not about you. Yes, you could connect it with toxicity with the Destiny community and how it affects you. But you say you are done with Bungie, and yet you're reminding yourself again that Bungie exists. It's unhealthy. It wastes people's time. And to be honest with you, you need to focus more on your court cases rather than drama bringing up with this article. Okay, this article is not made for you, Lono. It is made for the future of Bungie, the future of the Destiny community, as well as just simply improvements altogether, so that we won't have a situation like what happened to you in the future. Capiche? Capiche. Gosh. I am in such a messed up situation. I do not like Lono at all. But I have to be fair with him. Okay? What happened to him with Twitch and Destiny was wrong. Okay? And like I said with him before, I don't really like trusting he said, she said situations. And with this article, I really feel that this is more of a cover-up pin for Bungie with the Blizzard Activision situation altogether. And I think it's the same thing, okay? Right here. He said, she said, lots of sources, all that stuff. So yeah, it's a long video. In conclusion, I feel that IGN made this article, and Bungie saying we should read it may not be for honest reasons altogether. this does seem like IGN is part of Bungie and, like, basically being snuggled up to Bungie, making sure everything is good to go. Oh, we are being against them, but not really. It's basically a cover piece of what's happened in the past, and they want to make sure that they have something for the future. It's like, hey, we're not really like this. Just look at this article we made in the past. We are improving. And yes, Bungie has been improving a lot. You could tell by the expansions that we've been getting recently. Lots of good story, lots of good content, all that stuff, okay? Destiny is in a really good place right now. But if something goes down and something goes lower, guess what? I'm keeping an eye on you, Bungie. I really am. Like, I do love your games, but I am brutally honest with what's going on, okay? I have my criticisms of the past. I will have my criticisms later on. But I really don't feel too comfortable with the timing of this article. So yeah. This took a long time to make this video. I had to do lots of research with lots of the stuff here. So if you can, guys, make sure you like this video. Comment below on what you think about the article, or really just anything that's related to the article altogether. And go ahead and subscribe. You can go ahead and not only subscribe to YouTube, but you can also follow me on Twitter. You can follow me in Odyssey, another platform right there. And yeah. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. And remember, be excellent to each other and be gentle someones.